one time I got into a car accident. Protocol called for them pulling me out on the stretcher, stabilizing my neck. And the whole time I'm thinking, that's a drasha. This is not just an unfortunate situation. A drasha is happening to me right now.
Rabbi Shaanan Gelman is senior rabbi at Kehilat Chovevi Tzion in Skokie, Illinois. In one succinct sentence, Rabbi Gelman sums up the task at hand anytime someone approaches the Drasha speaking slot.
It makes the unfamiliar familiar or the familiar unfamiliar. But that's the agenda of every drasha. Take a medrash everyone knows and show you, reteach it to you in a way that you never thought of. Or take a medrash no one ever heard of and say, well, this is incredible.
He's a rabbi adept at spotting transformative drasha material, and he's willing to wait as long as it takes until a particular Torah message comes to life for him.
I've been criticized by close friends and others saying, why don't you just let it go and pick a new topic? Giving up on things, giving up on people, giving up on a Torah, to me seems like the wrong path to take.
Rabbi Gelman also places a high premium on great personal stories to help illustrate Torah ideas, and he's a master at curating them.
You rabbis always come up with the greatest stories. It's like the most amazing things happen to you. I said, no. The most amazing things happen to all of us, but we're trained to pay attention.
In this informative episode of the Maggid method, we discuss the imperative of authenticity when delivering a drasha.
Number one is be yourself. Be authentic. Don't try to replicate what you think is successful and other people are doing out there. If you represent yourself, your values, your process, it'll come across as genuine and it'll be appreciated.
The pros and cons of collaborating with a partner to help craft your sermon.
We would schmooze often for years on the parsha, and eventually it became like, not, hey, what are you talking about, but what are we going to talk about this week?
The need for feedback and how to handle criticism.
Someone tells you something you don't want to hear, don't reject that outright. This is the way you're being perceived, right? People say that they don't like the way they're appearing in a photo. Well, you don't like you yourself. You don't like the way you look, but that's how you look.
And Rabbi Gelman even shares one of the best true stories I've ever heard, and how he created a life-changing Yom Kippur drasha out of it.
This is the loudest place it's ever been. It froze, and you could hear a pin drop.
I learned so much from my interview with Rabbi Shaanan Gelman, and I'm sure you will too. So now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Rabbi Shaanan Gelman.
Morning.
Good morning, Shalom Aleichem. How are you? I'm from the Bronx, Pelham Parkway. Actually born in Buffalo, so I'm a big Bills fan.
Right. So we have that in common. I was born in the Bronx. Actually, I have a picture of Rabbi Zvulun Harlot at my bris, who just passed away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Chalab Zal had a bracha under my chuppah, from Ashlu Parkway. My father became very close to them and was grateful to him because when my brother was sick for a number of months, and he was in the hospital right next to his shul in Ashlu Parkway, and he would daven there frequently, and it became a shoulder to lean on in that difficult time.
Wow. So, yeah. I never knew him, but the earliest picture of me that I have is 8 days old with my grandfather and him at my bris.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I showed it to his son. His son lives in Cleveland, Rabbi Harlop's son, and he's a Rav there. And so I showed it to him, and he got a big kick out of it.
Wow.
1973. So that's a pretty old picture.
Right.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, so I grew up in the Bronx, and so the cast of characters, the people with whom I interacted with, Rabbi Leibel Dulitz Zal, Rav Gershon Yankelovich was someone we used to listen to his Mishnah Shiurim in Yiddish between Mincha Marav, and we would take him home after shul. Actually an interesting anecdote is when I became a rabbi in Chicago. So his daughter was living in Chicago, is a Rebbitzin in Chicago, Pearl Gross. So she reported back to my father or back to her father, Rav Yankelovich Zal, that I was doing well. I was very popular. So he said to my father, "Your son is very popular. It's not good for a rabbi to be that popular." And there's a famous tshuva echoing a tshuva. I don't remember, it was Maran Rutenberg. I think it was Maran Rutenberg who says also that you have to be giving Moser. And if you're not doing that, if you're too universally well-liked, you're not doing your job. A rabbi has to have detractors. But Rav Gershon Yankelovich was, alter mir. He was a student even of the Chavetz Chaim. And so to grow up in a community where you had these larger-than-life figures, and even if we weren't aware of it at the time, is through osmosis. And even the regular Balabatim were spectacular individuals. This guy, Rabbi Kalman, went to 2-3 minyanim a day just to be the Baal Korein, to be the Gabbai. He was a survivor. Mr. Kenningsberg, who survivor of the Russian gulags, and lost a few toes in the frigid winters. And in between aliyahs, he would sit down with me and open a Kli Yakar. I fell in love with the Kli Yakar. He'd say, "Come, sit, do a Kli Yakar," and always wanted us to lead the davening and Nair Niggins. It was like us, few of us kids, and then basically a group of Holocaust survivors. And so it's not like, so I don't think of, people tend to think of, specifically in modern Orthodoxy, they think of like this mythical Alterheim with these Yiddish figures, and that's what shul was like in the good old days. And to me, they were really normal, Hamish, good, normal people, and people who inspired my sense of Judaism and sacrifice and dedication to shul. So that really,
I bet they came on time too. That's one thing I always hear about the old people, that
absolutely
New York, they always came on time. Came early. We're sitting in shul, before it even opened for minyan. People, they were there turning on the
100%.
lights. Yeah,
100%, and that was in every single one of them, and so. It was also an opportunity to be able to speak often, because as the years went by and we were among the few young people in town, we davened for the Amud all the time. We would lane, and I would have to speak. I got up and speak, and I would give a drasha, and I give a Torah. And so these experiences sort of create this as a regular practice. So we talk about the rabbis you heard growing up. Yes, I had several fine rabbis. I would say that, and I'm sure they had an influence on me, and happy to go into that at some other point also, and they definitely did. But I think for me, it was more the experience of being able to deliver drashos, to teach, to be able to make a difference myself. But this also informed my attitude towards the stories I tell. Drashos, I think, have to be your own voice, and we'll talk about this when we get into the chabrusa element. The moment you hear someone else's voice in a drasha, I think that's where you're pretending, and that's where it doesn't fly. You could say over the greatest idea, the greatest chiddush in the world, you could use the sharpest line, the funniest joke, but if it's not you, if it's not original, it's not worth it. And so when you observe these characters, these people who are incredibly original, they are themselves, I think it inspires you to want to be yourself. That you're proud of your heritage, of your past, of your experiences. So the stories that I love telling, personal stories when I give a drasha, are stories about things that happened to me. They may not be the most earth-shattering events. They may not be the stuff that would make to make a Chanukah Teller book. But when I share them, I'm there, and the people are there with me. Like when our Caprice wagon, our station wagon, reached 100,000 miles. At one point, that was considered impressive. And I remember we took out the old video camera. We were going to film the odometer spinning over, and all of us were in the car, and my brother's playing guitar in the background, Chariots of Fire, do 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 do, and we're slow motion, and the event, and then as we're all focused on the odometer, we hit a curb, and the camera goes flying forward. These are events that, like, this is a whole drasha you could build around this, right? In other words, so people are hesitant to share their own experiences. One time I got into a car accident. Not everything happens in a car, and I was fine, but they had the protocol called for them pulling me out on the stretcher, stabilizing my neck. And the whole time I'm thinking, and this is something I learned from Rabbi Goldberg also, the whole time I'm thinking, that's a drasha. This is not just an unfortunate situation. A drasha is happening to me right now. So objectively, great stories are fine, and there's a place for them, but you have to personalize them. And like later on, I'll share with you my favorite story, which happened to a congregant of mine. But because it happened to a congregant of mine, when I share it, it's a story that's happening to me because it was shared with me. In other words, this is something that becomes my story.
Right.
It's probably, there are things there that could be published. There are things that could make waves and I think would sell out a crowd, but they're only meaningful when I say them. And the same thing is true for you. The same thing is true for every darshan. When you're sharing a personal experience, it goes a long way. And I find, and my wife always reminds me, personal experiences, particularly about courtship, about marriage, those are great stories. They go a very long way, as long as it ends well. There are times when I don't like to open up stories about my children, so it depends. When I was younger, I've been now in this pulpit for 17 years, and I started on Boca Raton. I would share every story. Every time, they made a mess in the house, and every time they said something funny, and every time they had a tantrum. But eventually, like a tantrum of a 2-year-old, you could share. It's a universal thing. It's not that embarrassing, and a 2-year-old can't object. But if your 16-year-old, flunks out of a class and like cuts class and doesn't mean, and there's a great message and all that, it's not, you don't have a right to share that to the tzibur. That's someone else's life. And so I'm finding that I become increasingly more and more reserved about some of those stories because there's someone else's cheshbon. And I'm not allowed to turn my life into a living drasha on someone else's account.
Do you ever ask permission of your kids if it's a good story? It's good.
Sure.
Good
Sure. Now I do. If there's something, if anyone is over 7 or 8 years old, all my kids are now over. My youngest is 9. But if there's a story that I would like to share, I ask their rishus at this point. Will not, because I learned the hard way. They're already on display. Some of them like sitting up with me. Some of them don't like sitting up on the front with me, but they're on display. Right.
And is it the same with your wife?
Does she ask permission, or do I ask her permission?
Do you ask permission before you share?
Yeah, if I'm going to share a personal story, she enjoys that when I. But again, there are things that are private. Rav Soloveitchik famously pointed out that he said there are things that I can share with some good friends. There are things that I can only share with my wife. There are things that I can only share with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. There are levels of privacy, right? And you can't just it's not fodder for the public just because it's interesting or entertaining. So that's an important aspect about stories. I think that's a key informative of mine. And I think I became over the years I became more refined and more sensitive to the types of stories that resonate and make an impact. And at the same time, while I'm more aware of those moments, I'm also more reticent to share them without permission. But my Gabbai always says to me, he said, how do you rabbis always come up with the greatest stories? It's like the most amazing things happen to you. I said, no. The most amazing things happen to all of us, but we're trained to pay attention. Like I said, I'm being pulled out on a stretcher, and that's a drasha. So we're trained because it's a professional hazard and it's an orientation, right? It's how we're schooled to say life is happening. I know you're a comedian, so you have to know you're in the line of work of observing what's going on. So everything that's happening, right? Jerry Seinfeld's Larry David. It's a thing. It's a story. It's a funny moment that is developing in front of your eyes, and therefore, since you're trained to see it, you have that unique vantage point. So stories happen to you, but they happen.
Do you write them down in case you ever forget them?
It's a great question. Occasionally, if something happens, I'm like, I'll write it down almost immediately, either on a notepad or a file. I have these files that I keep. Some I keep the Rabbi Rakovsky, some I have on my own. We have a file called Sheris Hapleta, where we sort of every year things that got cut on the cutting floor from a drasha, and you file it away in another thing and say, okay, I'll revisit it later on. That was a great story. That was a great article in the Wall Street Journal. That was something interesting I saw in the Atlantic. That was a funny human interest story. That was a cute thing I saw on a show I was watching. And we'll file it away and revisit it at a future date. But if it's written down, by the way, it's another way of remembering it, right? So you put it somewhere. This will fit with this parsha. This will fit here, and you right away you have all of your files on your computer for every parsha, so you could put it in advance as well. Certainly for Shabbos Shuvah, Shabbos Gadol, but obviously all drashas we're always thinking all the time.
So when you have a story, let's say that story with the stretcher that you just brought up. So, and you said that's a drasha. So are you looking to craft a message around that story, or is the message born out of the story?
That's an excellent question. I think what that speaks to is sort of the mechanics of drush. Some people build sermons around the message, and some people build the message around the chomer, and some people build the chomer around the drush. So what does that mean? You can always shoehorn. If you have a message that you want to deliver, you could always shoehorn some Torah into that. It doesn't take a chacham to find a tshuva or to find a source that supports any crazy idea you have. But the internet taught us that. And the internet also helps, and AI. That if you have a crazy idea, it will be out there. And if not, you'll just invent it. And that's a danger, I think, because I'm not being hired because of my political acumen. And I'm not hired because I have the most astute observations on the the crisis in Israel, or even something's happening on a local level. what is my area of expertise, or at least what ought to be my area of expertise, should be Torah and teaching. So I prefer to start with the material. Now, one of my role models in Drush is Rabbi J.J. Schachter, who I think his greatness is the ability to take a genuine source, one you either are familiar with or unfamiliar with, and find in it something that is exciting. I think he makes the unfamiliar familiar, or the familiar unfamiliar. But that's the agenda of every drasha. Take a medrash everyone knows and show you, reteach it to you in a way that you never thought of. Or take a medrash no one ever heard of and say, well, this is incredible. What does the Maggid Rabbi Eliezer says? And I cannot believe it says such a thing about Avram Avinu, about Moshe Rabbeinu. What do we make of this? How could it be? And there you have your drush right there. So I prefer to start from the Chomer. Another role model of mine in Drush, Rabbi Jonathan Rosenblatt, who is probably the most creative thinker in terms of his ability not only to anticipate and pinpoint the most important issues of the day even before they happen. I remember years ago him talking about half Shabbos before anyone even spoke about half Shabbos. But he's also a very creative darshan, and he's able to find the medrash, you find something and you detect heat. It's like it's warm. You feel the area, and it feels there's something coming out of it. And right away you know that this is golden. I don't know what to do with it, but I want to speak about this medrash. I want to talk about this Gemara. I want to talk about this problem. And whoever it is that we've learned, that we've enjoyed, one of the great things they do to build attention in a drasha is they find a piece of chomer, a piece of material that makes you want to know more about it. And so I prefer to start with the material, and then as I explore it, as I take it apart, as I ask the questions and hopefully come up with resolutions through the Makaros, the message becomes very clear. And so that's my preferred methodology, because my job is be'ekroni to teach Torah. And second to that is performance, entertainment, the jokes, the stories, this secondary.
Right, those are vehicles.
Right, they're a vehicle. Now, there are moments in which it would be considered tone deaf if you didn't craft a drasha around the subject matter. After October 7th, I don't think there's a single one of us out there who hasn't. The majority, if not all of our drushas, have touched on the situation in some way, shape, or form. Either the soldiers, the hostages, the political issues, the way it's impacting us in America, getting involved, tzedakah, you name it. Every single week. And I imagine it's going to be ongoing at least until Shabbos HaGadol. This is what we're talking about. It's on our minds, not just because it's on our mind, but it's on the Balavatim's minds. And so if you get up and you speak about, this week I'd like to talk to you about Hilchos Ribbis. Yeah, it's important, it's Talmud Torah, but it's tone deaf. So there are times in which you really have to deal with the subject matter. Again, you don't have to come up with one uniform message, but the goal then becomes to work in the reverse. I know I have to speak about this week, and now I'm going to return back to the sources, to the parsha, the questions. But what I will do is I have enough faith in the process and experience, and the fact that the Torah is enough of a gold mine, that even if I know I have to speak about X, Y, and Z, I will then go back to the parsha again, go back to the sources, open the same midrashim, open the Sifrei Chasidus, look at some of the halachic questions on the parsha, and build the drasha from there again, and then draw that bridge. I know it's going to happen. I know it'll come together. I just don't know how.
Amazing.
So I'm not going to build it around the message entirely.
Yeah. So again, so the story. So you have that story with you on the stretcher, just as an example. Is that filler? Where does that play a role?
So I don't even know what I would like. Again, if it was happening to me right now, I mean, there's a million and one things. If it's time, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur time, vulnerability, right? The reliance on other people, watching people function while you're lying down, and there's a whole world. The experience of watching a world go by as you're sort of lying horizontally, and people are operating, and people are doing all sorts of interesting things going on, and worrying about your car, and sort of the ephemeral nature of the physical element. And by the way, I picked up my car at the junkyard, and it was totaled. And I saw the picture of it, and I took a photo of it, and I wrote down, that medrash of HaKadosh Baruch Hu taking his wrath out on eitzim v'avanim, on sticks and stones, and not on us. And I remembered the carbon bias, and that what a bracha it was that we survived, and that we don't need our car. So everything around that bill, there is a drasha, and all of that depends on what I'm experiencing in the moment, depends on what the message of the moment is. But that experience itself is an interesting story because it happened to me, because I had to be pulled out of a car, because I had my life was put on hold temporarily because I went through this traumatic experience, right? Here's another part of that story that I didn't know years later, right? I made a left turn. I swear that woman came out of nowhere, not because she was a woman, not because she was elderly, because she came out of nowhere. Now, I made a left turn, so I'm penalized. It's my fault, right? That's the way it works. It's a low plug. It's the right way you can talk about low plug. So for years, that message for me would have been low plug. The rabbi can make a rule. The rule's a rule, whether you're right or wrong, right? But then I discovered that I was going blind in my left eye, and I lost periphery vision. And so I was able to go revisit that story from years earlier and say, wait a minute, she was there. I couldn't see her. I was blind. But when you are blind, you insist that you are the sole owner of the truth, because my mind was certain she did not exist in that space. For me to have seen her with my vision, I would have to have turned completely, which I did not do. And so you have the same story has 10, 20 messages, depending upon what you're experiencing in the moment. And by the way, maybe that's a good example of something. It could be a chapter in a book one day. How one story becomes the message that evolves as you evolve and as you mature, as you experience different components in life.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, keep on going.
I think it's Rabbi in Tales Out of Shul. Rabbi Emanuel Feldman has a great account. Every rabbi loves that book. In Tales Out of Shul, he has a story about a drasha he delivered in his earlier years about Noach, and when he was assaulted by his son, and that the brothers Shem and Yefes covered him up, but did so backwards, and they were each rewarded differently because Shem initiated it, so he's given tzitzis, and Yefes copied him, so Yefes is given burial. And he's talking about the different things. So he said that he gave this drasha, and you have to realize that not only are you delivering a different message, people are hearing a different message. So he said that one person came home, the wife didn't go to shul that day, so the daughter came home and said, "What did the rabbi talk about?" Oh, the rabbi talked about castration. Like, wow, because that's what Cham did to his father, right? So the mother's like, "Really? The rabbi gave a drasha about that?" The son came in a minute later and said, "What did the rabbi talk about?" Oh, it was sodomy, it was whatever. And the mother is saying, "What in the world did the rabbi darshan today?" The husband comes home 20 minutes later. "What did the rabbi speak about?" He says, "He spoke about tzitzis." It was so you could tell a story that people are going to latch onto whatever detail is meaningful to them. It's in Tales Out of Shul. And it's true. Each of those components happen in the story, right? So when you're speaking about something and there's different points in it, be careful, because everyone's going to hear their own version of that drasha. Mm-hmm. That's a message from the, now the other thing is I'll mention, maybe this is so we talk about form and function, right? And that in architecture we say form always follows function, maybe function. I think that's true. I think that it's true. Normally you do have a you do have to have a purpose and a focus in the drasha, but more and more I'm not sure that it's always necessary. I think that if your goal is to teach Torah, if that is the function of your drasha, and you believe in the integrity of the Torah enough in the process, I do believe that the form will emerge anyway.
Just to describe what you mean by form and function, because I don't
know.
Well,
I think along those lines, we talked about the function of the drasha is your message, is what you want people to take home. What's your point? And what's the lekach? And then the form is how you achieve that, is the chomer. So most people, I think, at least their take home is, what did the rabbi speak about? They want to know, what was the function? What was the point? What was his point? But I think from the darshan's perspective, it actually is different. I think that the ikar is the essential component is the material, is the Torah, the integrity of that material, and that if you believe in it and its truth, that ultimately the form will develop. But you have to be committed to the process of drush. You can't say, I'm just going to open up the first source I open up. It's going to pop out right away. You have to be learning. You have to be reading Svarim. You have to be reading other things. And if you are committed to that process, eventually the purpose will emerge from the function will emerge from the form. And I think that's.
You said that you have faith in that process because you've seen it happen over and over again.
I do. I think that whatever's happening, and you're trained to see the connections, but I think that they exist. In Torah, Torah is not just a parlor trick. It's not just an interesting topic, right? For a podcast, right? It's also holy. It's also alive. It's the living, breathing Torah that we're reading is happening in our lives right now. That's why when you're learning the Daf Yomi and you're learning Parsha and you open up this Sefer and this Sefer, everything starts to connect. Why does that happen to everyone? Because Kadosh Baruch Hu is speaking to us. We don't have Nevuah anymore. We don't have prophecy, but Hashem speaks to us through the Torah. And if you believe that as a purveyor of the Torah, then you be committed to that. Otherwise, it's kind of boring because you say, okay, here's what I have to speak about. First of all, who says you have to speak about that? I have to speak about this. And then you start to build a drasha, craft a drasha around that. You're limiting your source material, and it's disingenuous. It's disingenuous because who says that that's the message from the Gemara? Who says that that's what Rashi was talking about? That's what the Ramban was saying. That's what the Kli Yakar was saying. Who says? Maybe.
So you anchor yourself to the Parsha and you expect something to emerge from it.
That is correct. And I'll share another thing that I believe in. Again, this also, we'll talk about the Chavrusa component in a moment, but are you familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's revisionist history?
I'm vaguely familiar with it.
Okay. So in his podcast, the earlier seasons were, I think, a lot more entertaining, but one of the earliest episodes was about a famous song, Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. Everyone knows the song. I heard there was a secret chord that David played, right? So everyone knows that song. Leonard Cohen's music and words are very much steeped in religion and in Judaism, and then he had different stages in his life in which he was more connected, less connected. But the entire episode is about this song, which has probably been redone, 100 times by different artists. And each time, Leonard Cohen himself had redone the song dozens of times, perfecting it, changing the lyrics, changing it. So if you look at the first version or his later version that was actually put out there, they're a totally different song. And his contention is that there are two types of artists. There are artists that they're naturally brilliant, and the first stab at it, it's like a stroke of genius, right? Like the Beatles. And then you have those who they start out with something raw and unfinished and unpolished, and over the course of time, they committed to that song or that piece of poetry, that piece of literature, and eventually it's developed and it becomes a masterpiece, right? And if I had to put myself into one of those two categories, right, if I could compare it to any great artist, if I strive to be like any great artist, it would be the Leonard Cohen type, because I commit myself to an idea, to a source, to a piece of Torah, a question, right? A subject matter in general in halacha or hashkafa, and then I will explore it until I'm proud of the product. I've been criticized by close friends and others saying, why don't you just let it go and pick a new topic? And maybe it's the attitude that I have that I don't want to lose a fight. I'm very competitive. Rabbis are very competitive by nature. So I don't want to give up. Maybe it's that I believe something's there and I want to prove the world wrong. And I don't know what it is, but giving up on things, giving up on people, giving up on a Torah, to me seems like the wrong path to take. And so I will work on it against the advice that other people take, which is take a bunch of ideas, throw them against the wall, see what sticks. I never do that. If I have a medrash that I want to talk about, by the end of the week, that will be a drasha. Now, working with a chavrusa presents the opposite problem. And I think to a certain extent, my chavrusa has a little bit of the opposite approach, which is nice. But I work with Rabbi Rakovsky for the most part. I have other colleagues as well that I work with and share ideas. But the advantage is huge. Number one, fresh ideas. Each rabbi is reading different things. They're viewing current events from a different vantage point. We both have to talk about the top of the parsha at some point, so we have a common canvas. But we complement and we critique one another.
Hey there, fellow podcast listeners. There's a secret that great public speakers know. Did you know there's a method for cutting straight through to an audience's heart, grabbing their attention and holding it, and making a memorable impact with your presentation? The best speakers in the world utilize it, and now you can too, every time you get up to speak. Download your free Maggid Method of Public Speaking template at maggidmethod.com, maggidmethod.com. The Maggid Method will teach you how to find your authentic voice, craft meaningful presentations, manage people's attention, and build unbreakable bonds with your audience. Go to maggidmethod.com and download your free copy now. Now let's get back to the program.
What's the origin of who sought out who, or was it?
That's a great question. So
intuitive?
So here's the way. First of all, I think that Rabbi J.J. Schachter and Rabbi Kenneth Hain, I believe, had a chavrusa for many years, and he shared that openly with a lot of us. So the notion that we're going to work together, I think, is something that a lot of many rabbis did for a while. We would schmooze often for years on the parsha. And eventually it said, it became like, not, hey, what are you talking about, but what are we going to talk about this week? And so we started to do this in a collaboration on Google Docs. We'd edit. And at some point we were, especially in the height of COVID, we were actually writing it, word by word together and putting it out there because we weren't speaking. At some point in that year, I think I had the recognition, and we had become dependent upon one another for our own unique capabilities and deficiencies. I realized that I was not sounding like myself, and I asked him, I said, do you hear your own voice? He said, no. And so we started to do the following. We would work together on ideas. The concept was that we don't have to land in the same spot, A. B, we can disagree and say, I'm going with it anyway, and that would be okay. It felt unsafe at first to say that, which is interesting. And then finally, even if we come up with an outline together, we're writing our drashas independently. Doesn't mean the big ones, we still every now and then will write a complete drasha together, and the footnote will say in collaboration with Barakovsky. So if I go back and look at my drashas for 15, 17 years, many of them have his influence, and many have been co-written. But they all, hopefully, note that, because we understand that a rabbi can go back later on and publish something that you really want it to be original. So that's the challenge. The challenge is you want to make sure you maintain your own voice, and that's where we sort of landed on. We can use each other as a ground, a playground to toss ideas back and forth, to challenge one another, to be critical, but also to be able to be that person that I need to be, which is to stick to your story and your topic. And your conclusion, even if the other guy doesn't like it, which is. I read something recently that has, I think, helped me in terms of soliciting feedback. Stephen King wrote a book called On Writing, which is his work on how to write great novels. Now, just because you read Stephen King's on Writing doesn't mean you're going to become Stephen King. I think he's the best-selling author of our time. But he said one thing important. He said it's important to have an IR, an ideal reader. And he says that novels are letters aimed at one person. Or every novelist, he says, has a single ideal reader, and he made his wife that ideal reader. But at various points, you have to stop them and say, what is he or she reading? Call that person up and call the ideal reader and say to them, what did they hear? Do you understand them, right? Did the message come across? Where do their eyes start to move away from the book, and where are they putting down the book? At what point does your ideal reader put the book down? Because if you're in the middle of the most intense scene, you're not putting that book down there. You're going to finish the chapter. So I think this is true with drashos. You have to have your ideal audience right now. It's hard. A modern Orthodox shul that's diverse, it's tough because every week is a different. You could pick a different, but at least for each drasha, you have to have who's your target. right? Or a trusted person who understands the diversity in the crowd. And if you're catering to the intellectuals and the people who want to medrash and maisa and want to be uplifted with a loud, booming, sort of bombastic kind of scholar in residence that may not have the same tochen, you're losing that crowd. And you may not care, but our crowds are diverse. Look, our scholar in residence that we feature in our shul are diverse. Every time we bring in a guest speaker, there are going to be people who say that was the worst speaker I've ever heard, and there are people who say that's the best speaker I've ever heard.
And I have a question for you, because I know that your shul is unique in the sense that you have an Ashkenazic and Sephardic minyan side by side, right?
So we have more than that, actually. We have our Ashkama minyan. We have, which they want sort of the 5-minute meaningful. They don't need all the jazz and all of the window dressing. Then we have the main minyan, which is the main drasha. Everybody agrees they like a shorter drasha, by the way. It's the common denominator. The Sephardim, we have a Sephardic Rav, and he's the one who generally speaks there. But I will on occasion speak there, and when I do, I could be a little bit more free. You could be a little more charif. You don't have to be as guarded with the words, and people kind of get it. And there's an expectation of frumkeit over the intellectual component. Then we have a Shtibel minyan. Now we started, which is now Nusach Svard. There's Edut HaMizrach, and there they actually have a chabura. And so I say, and that's more of a halacha hashkafa chabura. It's a different style altogether. But what those guys don't want is they don't need you to get up with an introduction and a story. They don't understand, why would someone quote an article that he read in the Wall Street Journal? That's a waste of time for them. They don't want it, or they think it's a waste of time, or at least they're unfamiliar with that, and it's strange. So when people visit me from more yeshivish communities, they find it bizarre if I start a drasha with a story, with a current event or with something like that. They don't like the hook. They don't need it, or they're uncomfortable with it. So you have to know your audience. But yeah, I think
tell me about feedback. So people give you feedback, or you solicit feedback. How does that work?
I was just talking to the assistant rabbi about this the other day. He said to me, "Do you really want feedback?" And I said, "The truth is, in the moment, you probably don't want it, because we are all small human beings and we all fear critique. And there's so much energy, time, and emotion that gets poured into that 15-minute slot that if someone doesn't like it, it's the most invalidating thing in the world." But a few things, remember. Number one is,
I told my wife, I said, you can give me feedback on Wednesday from the Drasha on Shabbos. I'm open to it on Wednesday after I come down from that plateau.
Right.
That's when I'm open.
No, I hear. And you want to first feel good about it. First of all, after a while, you know where you stand. But I do think that if you don't have feedback, you're shortchanging them and yourself. You can't grow unless you hear, "Oh, I like that. Oh, that really spoke to me. Oh, that didn't." And if all the feedback are the people who love it no matter what, they're people who go to shir wherever it's hosted, whether it's hosted in a fancy house or it's hosted outside by the dumpster. Those individuals will support no matter what you do. It's validating, but it's not a complete picture. You do want people to say, "I got a real problem with what you said today," or "I didn't understand that. I didn't get the flow. I didn't know how you put that together. Well, I appreciated how you came back to that topic. That was really creative." You want people to give substantive feedback. It should be respectful. But now, how do you solicit that? I don't know. I'm not good at soliciting it because it's awkward. It's almost like you're begging for a compliment, or for pain, right? So I'm not good at that. I do each week receive some form of feedback from a few people, get a general sense of how the drush went. My wife is a good critic. But yeah, you don't have a lot of that. I have a brother. My brother goes to my shul, which is helpful. So your brother's trusted because you know that
he's
your brother
he's a congregant.
Yes. So that's a real advantage. If she's there that day. So, but what's always the best part about having a brother in shul is that when there's a hawk going on in the Kiddush club, he'll tell you about it. He's like, forget about the drasha. There's some things you have to know about, right? And I'll fill you in.
Like having an agent on the inside.
That's right. That's right. But I think the feedback piece is huge in that respect. I also recently, I mean, I've always had an interest in this, but psychology and the therapeutic approach has always been interesting to me. I'm now nearing the end of a master's degree in MFT, marriage and family therapy. In the beginning of COVID, I realized that we're going to have a crisis in our hands, and rabbis ought to be trained to respond. And that's why I pursued it. And I realized that over the course of time, this is now something I'm trying to make chapters in my mind. At least I have a file. I throw items in that file whenever I want to turn this into a chapter. But family therapy, marriage and family therapy is focused on the systemic roots of people's problems and struggles. So an individual dealing with anxiety or depression is not just an individual in a vacuum, but rather a product of the family, parents, grandparents, a culture, a religion, a community, right? It's a system. And that if you want to really treat anyone and help them, you have to treat the whole system. Now, that's the basic model of MFT. And I've grown to appreciate the narratives in Chumash through that systemic lens of family. And I'm working on hopefully what will one day be a book, not just a series of lectures that view the stories in Bereshis and Shemos, the narratives of Chumash, and even Chazal through that lens. So Bereshis is the book of sibling rivalry, the entire Sefer, right, from start to finish. And what if you created a whole Sefer on that lens, right? Who are siblings? They're our best friends. They're our biggest opponents. They're trusted, but they're great rivals. They're people who know how to get under your skin. That fight, that machlokas, is sown from our parents, right? So again, you have to be careful not to take something modern and impose it on the text, but it's hard not to see these themes as you do that. So that's recently I've been very interested in that as well. The Torah's narrative through that sort of psychological family therapy prism, and so yeah, it's been treating me well. I enjoy it, and it's something that unique. Yeah.
Tell me about, you said you were going to talk about, in the context of your chavrusa, you had a favorite story.
Oh, okay. I will share with you my favorite Drasha story. Actually, I think everyone's favorite Drasha story ends up being an Ne'ilah story. That's just usually what happens, because the power of a good story is it can't be too long. It's got to be incredibly strong. It's got to leave people to imagine and take home their own message. And it's got to have some humor. So that's like the perfect story. Now, where do you get a story like that? So there is this fellow who's from my community, Israel, Andrew. He has this company. He makes flavors for drinks, for like sodas, beverages, and things like that. So if you go to a supermarket and there's a no-name brand, that supermarket brand of Coca-Cola or whatever it is, there's a good chance he made that flavor. And I think he makes some of the Dr. Brown flavors also. So he told me that he one time received the email that every small middle-range business wants to receive. It was from Walmart. And we would like to talk to you about your products. And if you can come down to meet us in Bentonville. Bentonville is the place? In Bentonville? Yes, the corporate headquarters, right? We'd like to have a conversation with you. Yeah, it's in Arkansas. It's the corporate headquarters of Walmart. So he looked at the letter, and the letter was signed by a gentleman by the name of Adonai, Adonai. Okay, and it turns out it's a Hispanic name. I think it's a football player with the name. But he found it peculiar at the time. But, maybe, of course, he got on a plane. He arrived at the meeting, and he walks in to greet. He says, Andrew, hi, nice to meet you. My name is Ado, but you can call me Noy. That's why. He says, because I've worked with Orthodox Jews before, and I know you're not going to be comfortable saying my name. So he said, he says, let me tell you the story. Years ago, I was in charge of the South American product lines that Walmart sells. And they were now bringing me in to also manage the kosher line. And we did a whirlwind tour of all the Walmarts. I think it was the East Coast. We were traveling up and down. And probably before the cell phones existed. And it was the middle of, we went up to New York, went to the Catskills. It was a Saturday. The place was empty. They said, but watch what happens to this place Saturday night. Like clockwork, 9:30 is going to strike, and you're going to see the parking lot will be filled with station wagons and minivans. And Kachava, Motzei Shabbos arrived. The parking lot was filled with station wagons and minivans, and all the Hasidim came out. And he's describing to Andrews the side curls and the babies, and everybody's coming out to go shopping. And the items are flying off the shelves. You wouldn't believe it. It was incredible. It was exhilarating to see. So I'm walking through the aisles. I'm interviewing some of the customers. I want to know what products they're interested in, what they find, what they're looking for, what they don't, right? And I'm fascinating. Now it was time to leave. We had to hit the road and then go and make it early in the morning to the next one. The next one, it was a road trip. But they were trying to find me and they didn't know where I was. And Walmart's a rather large store. So they proceeded to page me over the loudspeaker. And they called out. And they said, Ado, are you in the building? And he said, this is the loudest place he's ever been in. He says, it froze and you could hear a pin drop. Once again, Ado, are you in the building? And a woman dropped her eggs on the floor. And that's how I learned that your Orthodox Jews are not comfortable saying my name. I turned to the Tzibor and I said, the hour is late and we have one more tefillah. Adoshem, kel rachum mechanu. If you are in the building, hear our voice this one last time. Please answer. The hour is late and we've got to go. And there's still business to be done in the next few minutes. And then we davened, Ne'ilah. So that's it's my favorite story.
Oh, it's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. But you see, it's a great story, not just because it's an awesome story. Because you told the story about a guy named Andrew, but I know him, and I know his business, and I can tell you about his business, and I can give you a backstory about the time I first met him, and but that's why it's interesting. Not that it's my story, but that it's something that we own, and we all have those things, those people we know. And I wouldn't dare give it over to one of these Maggidim because they'd publish it and then they'd destroy it for me.
Yeah. Amazing. So tell me, unless there's specific things you want to address, I'm curious a little bit about your technique, in terms of notes versus extemporaneous, movement on stage, things like that, pure technical stuff.
Right. I prefer, at least since COVID, but even before, and I write the entire Drasha, I'll place them on the website. I will actually hand them out after the Drasha is over and leave them. There are people who want to take them home to spouses, or we leave them in the hallway. People can take the Drasha to go with them. This started in COVID because we realized that people were not coming to shul. So we were running around the neighborhood and handing them out with a little bit of l'chaim and a piece of kugel or something. But it ended up becoming a great way to make sure that Drasha is finished by Shabbos. And now you have a collection that you can, if you're organized enough and you can put together a good website, you can make one of those great rabbi websites all about yourself that people love. So I have that material now. So I write it up completely. Initially, I preferred to have an additional outline because I didn't like reading word for word. There are times, depending upon the subject matter or how sensitive it is, that you want to make sure you read every word. Each word is nuanced. We were doing an enhancement to our machitza. Well, this required precision. And any word misspoken would have devastating, catastrophic implications. But sometimes you lose by reading. And the days in which, the Rabbi Looksteins of the world, or the great Darshanim, where they read every word, I think that doesn't resonate with people anymore. We have to pay attention, whether we like it or not. I said the bombastic public speakers who get up there and they scream and this. The reason they have an impact is because at least they're alive, right? So you have to incorporate that. Even if you are committed to genuine material, even if you're committed, style matters. So moving around is key. Eye contact is important. I think women in particular struggle with feeling like they're not part of the tzibor because it's more active than men. So I think that any way you can include them. What does that mean? Not in a disingenuous way, but your example should include stories about women and men, boys and girls. Right? I don't go with the he or she business anymore. That's yesterday, but no, a story about when we're referring to a generic child, talk about she, her, because that's 50% of your crowd, or at least 50% of your potential audience. And those are the people. And so engaging them means finding examples that are relevant to them. When I spoke last week in a nursing home, I'm not talking about, not talking about experiences with baby strollers, right? Diapers might be relevant, but I'm not talking about, you have to know your audience.
Right. When you address the Kehilat, I mean, the women are on one side and the men on the other because of the mechitza. Are you moving across the stage across the?
So first of all, our shul is designed. We designed our shul in such a way where it's split, down the middle. The Amud is still on the men's section, but it's somewhere near the mechitza. So I don't have to move that much, but I do move. I do move a little bit back and forth. Our mechitza also comes down. It doesn't fold down. It slides down into the wall, so it opens up the room a little bit. People can see very clearly. But I do move back and forth. One of the things we'll do every now and then, sometimes I'll do it because I'm tired and I don't want to write up a proper drasha, but sometimes I just want to teach the style of learning. I'll hand out a medrash. I'll hand out a source, and we'll read it together. And then I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll just do that kind of drasha. It's a different, people are more engaged, and it breaks things up a little bit. Scholars and residents certainly break it up also because you have a speaker who comes in.
So tell me the goal. This is a prime time slot. You have the entire congregation or a good portion of it gathered there together on Shabbos. What do you hope to achieve? What's the overarching goal? I mean, every drasha is going to have a different goal, but what specifically do you want to accomplish with that slot?
I want people to feel as if shul is a positive, engaging place to be at, and that the drasha enhanced their experience of that, as they looked forward to it. I want people to look forward to it. If you have people who are yawning or walking out, that's a bad sign. Now, has nothing to do with you. It could be a cultural problem, right? But it's the goal. The goal is they should feel that shul is more engaging and a place they want to be at because of the drasha.
Yeah. What are some of your pet peeves with drashas when you see sometimes, we're like kind of chefs going to other people's restaurants whenever you sit in somebody else's, shul and you see things like, what are some of the things that kind of rub you the wrong way? What don't you like to see?
A great question. We're probably most critical of the things that we're guilty of ourselves. And we only notice it. So I think when a point is belabored unnecessarily, when the speaker didn't give adequate time to prepare a way to present his idea, and so fumbles over his words, or is repetitive in terms of the message. I can't stand that sort of, I'm going to say something and then I'm going to repeat it again and repeat it again. It's a sort of Maggid style you find that I feel like it insults the intelligence of the crowd, right? We talk about the world of podcasting. We are now exposed to the best presenters in the world. You're going to get there on Shabbos and you're not going to prepare. You're going to look like you didn't have any sleep last night. You have to be sharp and you have to be on your game. The competition is not just in the room or down the block anymore. So I when someone doesn't look professional, when someone repeats themselves. That sort of thing gets to me. I also don't particularly enjoy when a drasha treads on the oft-repeated tropes and the same familiar mamari chazal that everybody says and that everybody shares, or the same generic, maybe art scroll stories of dubious origin that can be applied and are applied to every rabbi who no longer has a pulse. I think that's wrong. You can't. You have to think a little bit, and don't just go on aish.com and find the latest story and say, okay, this is a great story. Here we go, because they could do that. They don't need you for that, right? So a lack of originality when a person doesn't put the work in. I don't care. I don't even care if they're the best presenter in the world, but if they don't put the work in, that's what bothers me.
Yeah. And so I always end the interview with a question, which is, if you had two pieces of advice to give a speaker, someone who's embarking on his speaking career, as behind the pulpit or a lecture or something like that, what are the two most important primary pieces of advice that you would give from your experience to be successful?
Number one is be yourself. Be authentic. Don't try to replicate what you think is successful and other people are doing out there, right? If you represent yourself, your values, your process, it'll come across as genuine and it'll be appreciated. That's number one. Number two, you have to be receptive to what you're hearing. Someone tells you something you don't want to hear, don't become defensive, and don't reject that outright. This is the way you're being perceived, right? And you may not like it, right? People say that they don't like the way they're appearing in a photo. Well, you don't like you yourself. You don't like the way you look, but that's how you look. That's a picture of you. It's an actual representation of what you look like or what you sound like on tape. So these people are reflecting how you're being heard. And my advice would be is focus a little bit on how are you being experienced by the other person. Ask your children, ask your parents, ask your friends. How am I coming across? Do I sound angry? Am I saying this too passively? Am I giving too many examples? Right? Are my examples unrelatable or too generic? How do I sound? And so I think if you have that receptivity to your audience and you're in tune with your own original process, your own self, you'll be a lot more successful.
Amazing. Wow, that was really helpful. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to The Maggid Method, and I'm Daniel Steinberg. I hope you're finding value in all the insightful conversations coming your way, and I'm grateful for all the time we get to spend together. Now, I have a small favor to ask, one that can make a big difference. Your feedback is invaluable to me. By taking a moment to rate and review this podcast, you're not only showing your support, but also helping it reach new heights. Picture this: more reviews means more visibility. More visibility means more incredible guests lining up to share their stories and expertise with you. So, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, how about making some magic happen? Scroll down, tap that rating, jot down a few words. It's that simple. Your action today can pave the way for even greater experiences tomorrow. Thanks for your support. Learn more about the Maggid Method at maggidmethod.com, maggidmethod.com. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.